Marlene Hollis had 11 days left on her mortgage extension and a phone call already scheduled with a bank she used to trust. 300 miles north, a woman she had never met was driving towards Cedar County with a folder full of numbers that would either save the farm or bury it for good. The smell hit her every morning before the light did. Diesel, wet hay, and the particular mineral sourness of river mud that had dried into the porch boards and never fully left. Marlene Hollis was 44 years old, and for 22 of those years she had woken up in the same farmhouse 2 miles off County Road 9 in the flat green stretch of Cedar County, Iowa, where her husband's family had grown corn and soybeans since 1958. She had buried her mother-in-law in the plot behind the machine shed. She had raised 3 children, Dean, 17, Ruthie, 14, and Cole, 9, inside these 430 acres. And she had done it mostly without complaint, because complaint didn't put a crop in the ground, and it didn't get it out either. Tom had inherited the land from a father who inherited it from a father who broke it out of tall grass prairie with a team of horses. That kind of history sits heavy in a family. It sits heavier when the river takes it in 11 hours. The object that mattered, though nobody would have called it that in June, was an old cast-iron dinner bell mounted on a post outside the kitchen door. Tom's grandfather had rung it every evening at 6 to call the hands in from the fields, and though there hadn't been hired hands in decades, the bell still hung there, rusted at the clapper, mostly ornamental, mostly forgotten. Ruthie liked to ring it sometimes just to hear the sound roll out over the flat land. It didn't call anyone home anymore. It was just a sound the family kept making, because the sound had always been made. That June, the sky over eastern Iowa dropped 4 inches of rain in 9 days, and the Cedar River, which usually behaved itself, did not. Nobody in Cedar County will tell you they didn't see it coming. They'll tell you they'd seen high water before, and it had always crested and receded and left the bottomland a little richer for it. This time, it didn't recede. It sat. The frog chorus that usually sang the Hollis family to sleep went quiet the night the water reached the porch steps. Marlene remembers standing at the window at 11 p.m., watching Tom wade out with a flashlight to check on a heifer that had wandered too close to the fence line. And she remembers thinking, with a strange and sudden clarity, that whatever happened next was going to change the shape of their lives. The corn went first, 410 acres of it, 11 inches deep in silt-heavy floodwater for nearly 60 hours, long enough to drown the root systems past any recovery. The soybeans, planted late that spring and barely established, went the same way. When the water finally pulled back on the 4th day, it left behind a landscape that looked less like a farm than a battlefield. Flattened stalks matted with debris, fence posts leaning at 40-degree angles, a dead sow wedged against the culvert half a mile from where she'd been penned. Tom stood at the edge of the north field on the 5th morning with a soil probe in his hand and didn't speak for 11 minutes. Marlene counted, because counting was easier than watching his face. And underneath the ruin of that field, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not despair, not yet, but the cold, practical dread of arithmetic she already knew wouldn't work. The insurance adjuster came out on day 9. His name was Gary Petrusek, and he'd known Tom since high school, which didn't make the number he gave them any smaller. The policy covered replant costs and a percentage of expected yield, but the Hollises had scaled back their coverage 2 years earlier when a bad soybean market forced cuts across the operation. A decision that had made sense at the time, and now sat in Marlene's stomach like a stone. The total loss on the crop came to just under $340,000, The insurance payout would cover $81,000 of it. The mortgage on the equipment alone ran $1,400 a month, due whether or not there was a harvest to pay it with, and the note on the North 40 they'd bought from Tom's uncle 6 years back had a balloon payment coming due in November. Gary didn't look at either of them when he read the final number out loud. He just folded the paper and said he was sorry, and meant it, and it didn't help. That night, Dean, 17, and old enough to understand the difference between a bad year and a broken one, asked his father at the dinner table if they were going to lose the farm. Tom didn't answer right away. Cole, 9, kept eating his mashed potatoes like the question hadn't been asked. Because 9-year-olds have a mercy that older people lose somewhere along the way. Ruthie watched her father's face the way she'd learned to watch weather. Tom finally said they'd figure it out, which was the kind of thing a man says when he doesn't yet know if it's true. Over the following 2 weeks, the Hollises did what farm families in Cedar County had always done when the water came too high. They helped each other. Neighbors hauled debris. The Lutheran church 3 miles east ran a meal train that kept casseroles coming even when nobody had the appetite to eat them properly. But help with debris didn't help with the balloon payment. And Marlene found herself doing the thing she'd sworn she wouldn't do, which was sit at the kitchen table at midnight with a legal pad, trying to make numbers behave that had no intention of behaving. It was on one of those nights, at the edge of exhaustion, that she remembered the shape moving at the edge of her vision. Not a metaphor, an actual shape. A car she didn't recognize slowing down at the end of their gravel drive 2 days earlier, idling for a long minute, then pulling away. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now she couldn't stop thinking of it. The car came back on a Tuesday. A woman in her 50s got out, wearing a blazer that had no business in a farmyard, carrying a leather folder under one arm. She introduced herself as Carol Ann Bishop and said she worked with the Iowa State University Extension Office in a newer division most farmers hadn't heard of yet. One focused on agricultural literacy programs for schools. She said she'd been driving the county roads for 3 weeks, looking for a working farm close enough to town, with the right kind of barn, willing to have a conversation. She said she wasn't there to offer money, not yet. She was there to ask a question. Tom, still raw and suspicious of anyone in a blazer after the week he'd had, almost sent her away. But Marlene, who had spent 14 nights doing arithmetic that refused to work, asked her in for a coffee instead. Carol Ann didn't explain everything that day. She talked in pieces, mentioned a pilot grant, mentioned 3 other counties where something similar had been tried, mentioned that Cedar County's elementary and middle schools had almost no hands-on agricultural programming left since the district cut its ag ed budget 4 years back. She said there might be a way to use what the flood had taken and turn it slowly into something else. She didn't say how much money was involved. She didn't say what the something else would actually require of them. She left her card on the table, said she'd call in a week, and drove off down the gravel road the same way she'd come. Marlene sat with the card in her hand a long time after the taillights disappeared, turning it over, feeling the strange and unfamiliar sensation of a door opening somewhere she hadn't thought to look. Tom didn't trust it. He'd grown up hearing his own father talk about men in suits who showed up after hard years with big promises and small print. And Carol Ann Bishop, blazer or not, fit a shape he recognized. When she called back the following week and finally laid out the actual proposal, his first instinct was to say no outright. The idea, once fully explained, was this. The extension program had a modest state and federal grant, enough to renovate part of an existing farm structure into a functioning agricultural education space where local schools could bring students for field trips built around real, working farm operations. Composting, soil science, livestock care, seed-to-harvest cycles, the kind of curriculum that used to exist informally when more kids in the county had grandparents on farms and had mostly disappeared as those farms consolidated or closed. The grant would cover 40% of a renovation. It would not cover the mortgage. It would not replace the corn. It came with paperwork, inspections, insurance requirements of its own, and no guarantee beyond the first 2 years. Tom said the numbers didn't add up. 40% of a barn renovation wasn't going to save 430 acres of flood-damaged farmland. Marlene didn't disagree with the math, but she'd started to notice something in the way Carol Ann talked about the schools. The way she mentioned, almost as an aside, that similar programs in other counties had grown into modest but steady revenue streams, school district contracts, small tourism trickle from families driving out on weekends, summer camp partnerships that hadn't existed before. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't even close to what the flood had cost them. But it was something that didn't depend entirely on rain. The argument that followed lasted the better part of 2 days. It wasn't dramatic. Tom and Marlene weren't people who raised their voices at each other in front of the kids. But it was real, and it touched something old. Tom's identity had never been separate from the corn and the beans. His father had farmed that way. His grandfather had farmed that way. And the idea of turning part of the barn into what he kept calling, dismissively, a petting zoo for city kids, felt like an admission that the family had failed at the one thing they were supposed to be good at. It was Dean, 17, who said the thing that finally cracked it open. He said he wasn't sure he wanted to inherit 430 acres that drowned every few years and barely broke even the years it didn't. He said it quietly, not as an accusation, just as a fact he'd been carrying. And the kitchen went silent in a way that made clear everyone had heard it, and nobody knew what to do with it yet. They didn't take the grant that week. It took another 6, filled with 2 more insurance calls, one very difficult conversation with the bank about restructuring the equipment loan, and a visit to a farm 2 counties over that had converted half its dairy barn into an education center 18 months earlier. The dairy farmer, a woman named Peg Alverson, was blunt about it. She said the first year had nearly broken her. New regulations she hadn't anticipated. A slower than promised trickle of school bookings. Contractors who ran over budget on the renovation. She said the second year had turned a real corner. Small but real, and that the thing she hadn't expected was how much her own kids had come alive running the programs, teaching things they'd always known without ever realizing anyone else might want to learn them. Marlene watched Ruthie during that visit, 14, quiet, usually more interested in her phone than in farm business, lean forward while Peg's 15-year-old daughter explained the composting demonstration to a group of visiting 3rd graders. Ruthie asked more questions in that hour than she'd asked about the farm in the past year combined. They signed the paperwork on a humid morning in late July, 41 days after the water had crested. The renovation began in August, in the same stretch of the calendar that should have held a harvest. It didn't go smoothly. The grant money arrived in installments tied to inspection milestones. And the first inspection flagged wiring in the old barn that needed to be brought fully up to code, an expense nobody had budgeted for. Tom spent 3 weeks doing electrical work himself under the guidance of a cousin who'd gone into the trade, working nights after handling what remained of the farm's other obligations, the cattle, the fence repair, the endless post-flood cleanup that didn't stop just because a new project had started. There was a night in September when Tom sat on the tailgate of his truck outside the half-renovated barn, exhausted, covered in drywall dust, and told Marlene he wasn't sure they'd made the right call. The equipment loan had been restructured, but not forgiven. The balloon payment on the North 40 had been pushed back through a hardship program, not eliminated. The barn renovation was $3,000 over its allotted budget, with 2 milestones still to go. And the first group of scheduled schools wasn't set to visit until the following spring, which meant months more of expense before a single dollar of new revenue came in. He said quietly that maybe he'd traded one kind of drowning for another. Marlene didn't have a tidy answer for him that night. She sat next to him on the tailgate and let the question sit there instead of rushing to fix it. Because some nights don't need fixing, they need company. What she said eventually was that she didn't know if it would work either, but that for the first time since the water came up the porch steps, she'd stopped waking at 3 in the morning running numbers that only ever came out the same losing way. That wasn't nothing. The first school group arrived on a cold, bright morning the following April. 22 third graders from Cedar County Elementary, bundled in coats too heavy for the actual temperature, herded off a yellow bus by 2 teachers who looked almost as nervous as Tom did. He'd rehearsed his opening talk about soil health 4 times the night before and still stumbled through the first 2 minutes. Ruthie, who had asked to help run the composting station, didn't stumble at all. She'd spent the winter learning the material properly, reading extension pamphlets Carol Ann had left behind, testing the demonstration on Cole until he could recite half of it back to her out of sheer repetition. Watching his daughter explain decomposition to a circle of 8-year-olds with more confidence than he'd managed with adults his whole life, Tom felt something shift that he couldn't fully name yet. The revenue that first spring was modest. Booking fees from 4 school districts, a small stipend from the extension program. A weekend open farm event that brought in families willing to pay for the novelty of gathering eggs and touring a real working operation. Combined, it didn't come close to replacing what the flood had cost them. Nobody had promised it would. What it did was give the family a second, smaller stream of income that didn't rise and fall with the Cedar River, and it gave them breathing room on the mortgage that hadn't existed the year before. The corn came back too, eventually. Not the same acreage, not the same confidence, but back. Tom replanted the fields the following spring with a renewed, harder-won respect for the ground and its limits. And for the first time in his adult life, he carried full flood insurance on every acre, even the ones the agent said didn't strictly need it. He'd learned that lesson the expensive way, and he wasn't going to unlearn it for the sake of a cheaper premium. It was late the following autumn, on a cool evening with the light going gold across the reworked fields, when Marlene stepped out onto the porch and found Cole, 10 now, standing under the old cast-iron dinner bell, working up the nerve to ring it. He'd heard his grandfather's stories about the bell calling the hands in from the fields, back when the farm had needed more hands than family. He asked Marlene if it still meant anything, ringing it, now that there weren't any hired hands left to call. Marlene looked past him toward the barn, where the lights were on in the renovated wing, where Ruthie was closing up after a group of visiting 4th graders, where Tom was walking in from the fields he'd fought to bring back to life. She told Cole to go ahead and ring it anyway. Maybe it wasn't calling anyone in from the corn rows anymore, but there was still a whole family it could call home at the end of a day that had, against every hard number on that midnight legal pad 2 years before, somehow turned into something worth ringing a bell for. Cole rang it. The sound rolled out flat and clear over land that had drowned once and come back changed. Not saved exactly, not rich, not the same, but standing. And for the Hollis family, on that particular evening, standing was enough.